All right. Let's do the introductions while we're not fucking barking. Well, I can
Hey guys, welcome back to the Armchair Coaching Podcast. On this episode, we'll be talking Oklahoma Sooners football. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're going to be talking some Oklahoma Sooners football. I am your host, Coach Sheffer. I am the offensive line coach at Brentsville District High School in Nokesville, Virginia. And I want to introduce you guys to the other podcast guests. So, Coach Bennett, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Mathew Bennett. I'm the co-offensive coordinator and offensive line coach at Clinton High School in Clinton, South Carolina. I don't have any podcast or anything like that, but if you want to talk some football, you can follow me on Twitter at Coach Bennett32. Shoot me a message. I'm always ready to talk some football. I've also got my co-host Bo, Poppy, and Stella here with me tonight because my beautiful girlfriend Jordan is in her grad class, so I'm dog sitting all three dogs while we're trying to do the podcast. So if you hear any barks, it's either them or Coach Bandstra. So sorry for that beforehand.
Speaking of Coach Bandstra, go ahead and introduce yourself too.
I appreciate that, Coach Bennett. I appreciate that a lot. My name is Nick Bandstra. I'm the special teams coordinator and wide receiver coach at Fairborn High School, just outside Dayton, Ohio. Unlike Coach Bennett, I do have a YouTube channel. You can find me at Coach Bandstra or Nicholas Bandstra on YouTube. Got a bunch of free coaching clinics, interviews, miscellaneous breakdowns, and other football-related stuff on there. I want to thank Coach Sheffer again for having me on. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. And I will, I'll put a link down to Coach Banstra's YouTube channel below in the info. Coach Steve, you're up.
Yeah, Coach Steve's back again. Thanks for having me. I'm the offensive line coach and run game coordinator at Addison High School. It's a western suburb of Chicago. I have Twitter, Coach_Steve72. I have my own podcast, Sideline podcast with Coach Steve. I had Coach Bennett on earlier today. He was my first guest. Got to rip that Band-Aid off and get it started. And it's on YouTube as well under the same thing. And thanks for having me once again.
No problem. And I will also – God, this chat's going wild. I will also link your YouTube, and I'll go ahead and link your Spotify to your podcast down in the information below as well. All right. Without any further ado, we are going to profile Oklahoma Sooners football today. So far we've talked Clemson football and we've talked Auburn football. And now we're going to talk about the trifecta of the offenses with Oklahoma and Clemson and Auburn. And those are the big three is what I call them for the offenses on Twitter, if you're not counting the air raid. So let's go ahead and, real quick, talk a little bit about some news in college football. They did release the preseason top 25, the AP top 25. Let me see if I can pull that up here real quick.
Who was number one?
Number one was Clemson.
Damn.
All right. Number two, a team not playing this year, Ohio State. Number three is Alabama. Number four is Georgia. Number five is Oklahoma. And oddly enough, the national champion from last year is LSU at number 6. So talking about those first 6 there, do you guys have any comments or questions about that? Just kind of leading off today.
I mean, even though I am the Ohio guy out of this group, I mean, it's a little odd that it's going to be odd in general, but it's odd that you're still ranking teams that aren't going to play this fall. Like, It's just like, I mean, move other people up and go. I mean, just chat. It's going to be great tonight. I can tell already. This is great. But yeah, I mean, that part is just weird, I should say. I mean, I don't know how you rank a team that isn't going to play, but I mean, it is what it is. I mean, I don't disagree with really it. I mean, Clemson, you got to prove it. I mean, beat them. I mean, LSU did last year, but LSU just lost half their staff and half their offense and defense. So, I mean, of course, I mean, I was just honestly surprised they were that high. I mean, given how much they lost, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I think this chat's going to be a little distracting. I think my question about like all this is, without two of the major football conferences playing in the fall, how in the world are we going to have a true national champion? Because you can make an argument right now, Ohio State's going to make a run for it if they were playing. Obviously, they're not. And I've heard some people on Twitter say, well, if they decided not to play in the fall, they forfeited their right for a shot, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with that because of who knows what's really going on with COVID. I'm going to be honest. I'm not sure anybody really knows 100% what's going on. All right, well, let's quit talking about COVID and go ahead and talk about Oklahoma. All right, a team that's actually playing this year. We'll talk about a team that's not playing this year on the next podcast. All right, so let's talk about some stats because I'm one of those stats nerds. We've got the Oklahoma Sooners head coach is Lincoln Riley. With 3 seasons as the head coach, Lincoln Riley is 36 wins and 6 losses with a win percentage of .857. Compare that to the all-time Oklahoma. That's 908 wins, 327 losses, and 53 ties. That is a .726 win percentage. So even though Oklahoma itself is already one of the most winningest college football teams in history, in 3 seasons, I know it's kind of a small sample size, Lincoln Riley is well above average at Oklahoma at win percentage. They have made 4 college football playoff appearances with 0 wins. I think the closest they came was in 2017 when it was Baker Mayfield playing for Oklahoma, right? They took Georgia to overtime. Am I correct on that one? I remember that one. A little bit of background. I am a Texas fan, so that kind of leaks to my wife as well. And let's just say she never really liked Baker Mayfield all that much. And so when they lost that playoff game and they showed Baker Mayfield on the sideline not very happy, she said, "Suck it, Baker Mayfield." So it's a little bit of background there. Their last national championship was in 2000, but in conference, in the Big 12, they have been very successful, and they have actually won the Big 12 in the last 5 seasons. So you can honestly say in conference, they are the standard in the Big 12. And it looks like they might be the standard for a long time to come. All right, so let's go through some game stats. In 2017, with a final record of 12-2, offensively, they had 579 yards of offense per game, 45 points per game, 217 rushing yards per game, and 361 passing yards per game. The next year, 2018, also a 12-2 season, they had 570 yards per game, 59 points per game, 247 rushing yards per game, and 322 passing yards. 2019, last season, another 12-2 season. They had 537 yards per game, 42 points per game, 240 yards rushing per game, and 297 yards passing per game. So, points per game, yards per game, they are one of the top offenses in the country, if not the top offense in the country, except for maybe last year, obviously, with LSU. So let's get into the questions here. And Coach Steve, I'm going to let you have the first shot at question number 1. What are your personal thoughts and impressions on Lincoln Riley?
He's kind of like a Gus Malzahn, where he's an offensive genius. He can adjust to anything. He's really good at game planning. But I also think he is pretty lucky because he had Baker Mayfield transfer in. Then he has Kyler Murray come in. Then he gets Hurts to come in from Alabama. So he's getting these quarterbacks every single year. And like we were talking about with Auburn, does Auburn have a quarterback problem? Well, Oklahoma doesn't have a quarterback problem. They get their quarterback. They can score points. So I think he's an offensive genius. I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself, but it just seems, again, like Oklahoma, it needs to get over that hump. I think they were their own worst enemy against Georgia. It seems like their foot came off the pedal there. The play calling wasn't as aggressive as it was in the first half, as it was, in the second half as it was the first half. So again, kind of like at Auburn, they just need that extra, push. And to me, it's not always the offense. Sometimes I feel it's that defense because they get a defense that's a bend, don't break, but sometimes it breaks, and it breaks in the college football playoff. So he's a really good coach. He's only been there for a little bit. I think here in a few years, they might burst out of that bubble and win. But yeah, you can't take away from all the offense he's created. I think he's a genius at it, taking that air raid from Mike Leach and putting some run to it and RPOs. So yeah, I think that any place would be lucky to have him.
All right. Coach Bennett?
To echo the stuff Coach Steve said, like I told you before we started, I've gone back because Lincoln Riley he's a Twitter darling. He gets a lot of play on the interweb, especially amongst anybody who has ever called stick and calls themselves an air raid guy. He's one of their savants. He is one of the most innovative play callers in college football. You go all the way back to when he was calling plays at East Carolina and had the Pirates fairly relevant. And they were putting some numbers up. So I do think he's one of the most innovative play callers. He's kind of added a little bit of edge to that air raid, whereas, the Hal Mummy thing is I'm not soft and all that, because that's the MO for a lot of people who don't know anything about it. He's put a little edge to it, and part of that's because he's good at hiring and good at keeping people, and he's got beating balls as offensive line coach. I'm always going to bring up the OL coach because he's one of the most important coaches. It makes his job a lot easier because he's never got to worry about the front five not knowing what to do. Another thing I wrote down in my notes about Lincoln Riley is the second thing that comes to my mind is he should never leave Norman, Oklahoma. He can stay right there. He can be Barry Switzer 2.0, Bob Stoops 2.0, whatever you want to say. He should never, ever, ever, in my opinion, even go interview for another job. Now, his aspirations are on him, but he can stay at Oklahoma and average 10 wins a year from now to the end of time because of what they got going. Granted, something insane doesn't happen. And I think it's because players and coaches both believe in him. I don't think it's by happenstance that he seems to land every Power 5 transfer quarterback that can sling it around and run a little bit. I think it's because kids believe in him. You don't see a lot of former players, if any, come out and say anything negative about the program. And, he'd run for mayor of Oklahoma tomorrow and win. And I think he's got a great thing going there. I think he's not Midwest, Southwest Dabo. He should never leave.
All right. Coach Bandstra.
They've kind of hit the nail on the head. He's a very good offensive-minded coach. I liked him back when he was at ECU as Ruffin McNeil's OC. I thought that was a great matchup. I know Ruffin, I can never pronounce his name correctly. He's one of his longtime mentors. He was on his Oklahoma staff up until this past year. He did some good things down there. He made ECU relevant and competitive. He's done a great job. Kind of to Coach Steve's point, he was given a very good team. It's not like Bob Stoops left the cupboard bare. He left him a good staff for the most part and a good team. He's done a very good job at when he's had to replace people. He's brought in good staff members. And I think he's improved the recruiting in all honesty. I think they've kind of taken it up a notch. They've done a good job. He's known as an offensive genius, and I think he is. But I mean, kind of we talked about before. I mean, his genius isn't so much how many plays he runs; it's the how he hides stuff or how he calls it. He just, I mean, the problem has been that month off in between a game is when he gets caught by like Nick Saban or somebody.
Yeah, I kind of have to agree. Wrote a couple notes here. You know, obviously he's an offensive guru, and that's what everybody knows him for. I think, you know, in a minute we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about his offense, but I feel that yes, to what Coach Steve said earlier about the quarterbacks, he's been very lucky getting 3 very gifted quarterbacks in a row, but he's also been very flexible with those guys because they were gifted in 3 very different ways. Baker Mayfield was a gunslinger. Kyler Murray could do everything, but he was freaking fast as well. And then Jalen Hurts, big bruising running back, basically at quarterback, almost like a Tim Tebow type guy. But he was able to adapt his offense to fit each quarterback and make each quarterback very successful in that offense. All 3 of them were at some time considered for the Heisman. So there's something to be said for that. I also think he's a phenomenal recruiter. Like some of you guys, Coach Bennett, you kind of mentioned it a little bit. The reason I think he's a phenomenal recruiter is because he's young and he's able to connect with the players in a way that, unfortunately, an older guy like Bob Stoops probably never was able to. He understands social media. He understands the importance of social media to today's kids. And you look every other day on Twitter and you see they've got another 5-star guy, another 5-star receiver that just showed up, you know. This year's going to be interesting because it'll probably be the first time that he'll be the head coach without a transfer at quarterback. He's going to have a homegrown product there with Spencer Rattler, most likely, will be the starter. So we'll see how that works out. But from everything that I've heard, Spencer Rattler is the real deal. So we'll see what happens with that. Okay. Coach Steve, you kind of mentioned it early on in your answer. The one major weakness that Oklahoma seems to have every single year, defense. I don't know. This is one of those things a lot of people on Twitter talk about, you know, those spread coaches, the offensive gurus, for whatever reason, you know, for the most part, except for maybe a Clemson or an Alabama, the defenses of spread teams that want to throw the ball and go fast don't seem to be very good. Now, I don't know if that is a product of the head coaches, the offensive guru, so they don't really focus on it, or do we think there might be something else there that's kind of missing, something that else is that defense is missing? Anybody want to try to comment on that?
I mean, I think they're heading the right direction. I mean, yes, I mean, when he took over the head coaching job that first year, it was almost abysmal, like every other Big 12 school. But, I mean, Alex Grinch is a great hire. Like, I don't know why – I mean, he was great at Washington State. I don't know why his 1 year here at Ohio State didn't work. I've heard rumors, but, like, why that didn't click. But, I mean, they were massively improved last year without Grinch transitioning to Grinch's defense and without having him full personnel, a full 1 or 2 off seasons to recruit for that defense. But they were tremendously better. They're heading the right direction. Yeah, it's been shaky lately, but I mean, Alex Grinch focuses on being aggressive and getting turnovers. And if you can couple that with that explosive offense they have, I mean, you're talking about a recipe for success. I mean, their problems are when, and I go back to my earlier statement, is when somebody has a month to game plan for them offensively and defensively, that's where the problems seem to consistently be.
Anybody else?
And could it be that that defense is built around the Big 12 and not the SEC, where are they smaller? You know, again, bend don't break. I feel like there's games in the Big 12 where they give up a lot of points. Then there's games where they give up a lot of yards, but they're not giving up the points. then to, like he said, a month late, you know, if you have a month off, now you're going to go play LSU or Alabama or whatever that will split those scholarships evenly. We're going to have just as many good defensive players as we do offensive players. Now you got to figure out how to do this. So is it the Big 12 that they're more worried about the games they got to play week in and week out until then? Or, you know, I don't know how they recruit that or anything, but that's a thought from watching them.
Yeah. Coach
I think that's probably got a lot to do with it. You're playing in that Big 12, and everybody's except for Kansas State, everybody's basketball on grass, fast as you can go, run. And whereas in the SEC, that those linebackers in the middle might play at 225. In the Big 12, they might play at 210, 205. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but when it comes college football playoff time and Clemson and Alabama line up and say, we're going to run the football right here in Big Gap, fit up and stop us, you got, you know, you're not bringing as much to the party as you would be if you played a little bit more run-heavy teams every year. And, I mean, like you said, I think they're geared up. They're geared up to play that Big 12 schedule, and they got to chase slot receivers across the middle of the field all year.
All right. Those are really good answers. Let's move on to the next question. And Coach Bandstra, I'm going to give you a first shot at this one. Specifically in the Big 12, is there an aspect of the Oklahoma football program that helps them to dominate in conference?
I mean, we kind of just talked about it, is the lack of defense. Sorry, excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you. I think that's one big hindrance. I mean, that not long. I mean, blunt. I mean, who's been relevant in that conference the past 5 to 10 years? I mean, Texas has fallen off the map. I mean, for a variety of reasons. I mean, Kansas has been abysmal up until second half of last year. Kansas State's gone through a head coaching change. And even then, I mean, Bill Snyder, I would argue, is probably one of the greatest college football coaches of all time, what he was able to do at Kansas State. But even then, it's still Kansas State. Iowa State is historically not good. Texas Tech has been treading water, is the term I'd probably use to be nice. I mean, Baylor's been through several coaching changes, and, I mean, they were good last year, but, I mean, God knows what they'll look like this year. And I know I'm missing teams. Oklahoma State, I mean, Mike Gundy's a fantastic coach, and I love the mullet. But, again, Oklahoma State's a 8-4 team historically. Like, that's just who they are. I mean, so, whereas you look at the SEC, I can name 4 or 5 teams that could be national contenders every year. I mean, Big Ten, I could name 2 or 3. So it's like, outside Oklahoma, who are your contenders? I mean, they'll get tripped up by somebody. They always do. That's why they go like 12-1 going into the playoff. But, like, who's their competition? Who plays defense in that league? I mean, and it's all. I mean, and it's not necessarily their fault, but even then, the Big 12 does not recruit nationally. I mean, Big 12 recruits Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and a little bit of Colorado for the most part. That's not probably 80 to 90% of the recruits that enter all those schools. I mean, you'll get some from Florida and Ohio, Texas, Pennsylvania, here and there. I mean, California, but it's not geographically. I mean, Texas supplies enough talent to where they don't have to, but also that could be a hindrance at times. There's a certain type of kids you're missing out on.
All right, Coach Bennett.
I mean, I think the same old song and dance. The Big 12 isn't great, but I think it's getting better. I mean, I think Mike Gundy right there in their backyard's kind of keeping them on their toes, playing them close in the Bedlam game. Just like it would be better for college football across the board, it would be better for the Big 12 if Texas was better. And I think I think that Texas has proven they're either going to get there or they're going to spin themselves into oblivion trying. So that's what's going to end up happening there. Eventually, money turns into success. I also think the fact that he's made it a quarterback transfer destination. Like, if you're a second-string player at a school like in Alabama or, you know, an Ohio State, somewhere like there, and there's a hot shot kid a year younger than you ahead of you, and you think you can play, Go to Norman, Oklahoma and find out, because he'll adjust his system to fit you. And I also think the recruiting that they do well is offensive skill players, because it's a fun offense to play in. I mean, it's fun going out there and scoring a bunch of points, and they do it better than anybody in the conference that does it the most. So I think it makes things easier for recruiting. I agree with Coach Bandstra. They don't recruit nationally as much as you would think, but I do think they do more on the West. I think they recruit the West Coast more than any other Big 12 school. They just may not get all those kids. Because, I mean, the West Coast kids, they're going all over the country right now. Kind of like the Florida and the Georgia kids. No, just kidding. All Georgia kids go to Clemson. But, I mean, they're nationally – kids from California used to just go to USC. Mm-hmm. Well, now they're going all over the country to play. Clemson's got a couple on the roster. I know Ohio State does too. And Texas and Oklahoma is really the only two Big 12 schools that can tap into that market with their name recognition. I think they've exposed that a little bit. But I think the Big 12 route's going to get a little harder for them in the future, in the near future, because there's some innovative stuff going on out there, because God Almighty, you got to be innovative when every freaking team you play is going 1,000 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. Except for Kansas State. Go Kansas State.
Real quick before we move on, I kind of just looked at real quick. The American Athletic Conference finished with more teams in the top 25 last year than the Big 12. Big 12 had 3. Like the American Athletic Conference ain't. I mean, they have some good teams, but it ain't like people are going to spend $120 million on football every year. Like that goes back to the problem. You don't have mm-hmm. There's 2 or 3 teams, and then it ain't nothing.
All right, and Coach Steve.
Yeah, they've said a lot. I think it's just the schedule. They don't have a crazy schedule like we were talking about with Auburn, or even like Clemson has a tough schedule, but not like an Auburn. So I think they get the recruits that they do need, and they get the quarterbacks to transfer in, and they're able to beat those teams. Some give them trouble. TCU's might give them trouble. I know Oklahoma State's giving them trouble, and there's going to be an upset. But I think their schedule helps out a lot for them to be dominant year in and year out. And they always find a quarterback that can play, all the way back when Bob Stoops was there. There's always a quarterback there that can play. And if you've got that and can build the offense around them, you're going to do well. So I think the schedule in the Big 12 helps a lot. And only having like a Texas to worry about helps a lot.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we kind of touched on it a little bit with the recruiting. Coach Bennett, you said it. They really seem to recruit those skill players very well, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And if you look at the last couple draft classes out of Oklahoma, who's it been? Wide receivers. You got like Marquise Hollywood Brown. You got CD Lamb going to the Cowboys. Who's the running back at Cincinnati right now? Mixon, right? Joe Mixon.
Yes.
From Oklahoma. Kyler Murray, all those guys.
Baker Mayfield.
They're all offensive guys. You had a couple offensive linemen go because they had a really good offensive line when they had Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray. So, and I think I kind of mentioned it before with Lincoln Riley. They play to the strengths of their players very well. They adapt their system to their players and what they can do. They don't necessarily have to recruit players to say, hey, you can come play for us because this is what we do. They say it's kind of like all right, well, what can this player do? Let's move the offense around that. And so I think that's been very successful for them. And Texas keeps kicking their boots around a while, so who knows what's going to happen with that. All right, talking about offense and Lincoln Riley, what do we think? Like, what aspects of the Lincoln Riley offense, what is it that high school coaches seem to love? Because you see it on Twitter every week, all the time. There's a clip of an Oklahoma play here. There's some guy doing a online clinic of Oklahoma running GT counter there. Somebody somewhere is talking about Oklahoma offense, almost like they do with Auburn. So, Coach Steve, I'm going to let you have first shot at this. What do you think it is about the Oklahoma offense that so many people love?
I think first thing, you're seeing the trend of up tempo, go, 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 go is all the rage right now. Even though I love the spread, I don't know if I can run a play every 10 seconds. I'm like, how do you even game plan to call a play every 10 seconds? I need to see what the defense is doing. But I think you're seeing that up tempo, go offense everyone loves. But I also think you're seeing him incorporate, because he worked under Mike Leach at Texas Tech. So he learned the passing concepts with the air raid and everything. So I think what people like is that he's kind of incorporated not completely old school run game, but to love to see both guard and tackle pull for, the old counter and, things like that. He's incorporated RPOs off of it. So I think, coaches are seeing that and loving it and saying, I can do that, or, I can make it simple enough. Again, it's not as simple as Auburn's offense, but it can be made simple where you say, okay, we're going to run counter tray or counter, and then we're going to have an RPO off it all of a sudden, and bang, there's a touchdown. And then people today love to see a lot of points scored. So if Oklahoma's going to score 40, 50 points, that's what people want to see, That's just how we all are. Even like basketball, people love to see NBA games go in the 120s. They don't want to see a 7-6 game or a 21-14 game. They want to see the 50s and 40s game. So high school coaches say, well, if they can score a lot of points, we're going to do it as well. But I think it's just because you're seeing all the run plays combined with air raid, combined with RPOs, they just love to see. And they want to do the same thing.
Yeah. I was watching a little bit of film on them, and I obviously don't have all the all 22s that you guys seem to have. But the one thing I notice about them the most, and I think this is one thing that a lot of high school coaches really love, is that they get the most bang for their buck with every single run play that they do. And the number one run play that everyone knows that Oklahoma's going to run is the guard tackle counter, the GT counter. They run, forgive my language, they run the piss out of the guard tackle counter over and over and over again. And every team knows it's coming. But they run it from multiple formations. They run it with multiple different types of motion, lots of different misdirection going on, lots of different reading, RPOs. There's so many things they can do off of one play, and then they're going to hit you with another play that they're pretty good at too. And as an offensive line coach, I aspire to that because guess what? I only have to teach one blocking scheme, and we can run 10 different plays off of that one blocking scheme, and my O-line doesn't have to learn anything new. So we can get really good at that GT counter, and the only people who have to know anything different are the quarterbacks and running backs and the receivers. And, they're not really blocking anyways, so they got to learn the plays. So that's one of the reasons I think that they're so successful and why coaches love them. Coach Bennett, you have some thoughts? Coach Bennett?
Let somebody else go first. I'll be right back.
All right, cool. Coach Bandstra.
I kind of to just piggyback off you two, like there's two things. One, it's O-line friendly, which any of us that are former O-line guys or coach offense know. I mean, that's the key. I mean, they don't have to learn a bunch of crap. Everybody else has to learn a bunch of stuff. I mean, it's very simple. The other thing is kind of going back to Coach Steve's point. I mean, it's like the perfect myriad of a spread power attack with air raid passing concepts. And then you combine all the RPO stuff with it. It's that perfect combination. I mean, there's not many coaches that don't love watching somebody run counter. I mean, the only thing you could argue that offensive, especially offensive line coaches love running more is power. I mean, and counter is just power, different direction. I mean, that's just short version of it. I mean, so those two combinations I think are perfect. In so many different ways he runs stuff off of counter. It's just so beautiful. He reads the end off counter. He RPOs off counter. I mean, he'll formation and run counter this way. It's the definition. We kind of talked about this off the air. It's is the perfect definition of a high school coach. What a lot of us high school coaches say is, I'm running 4 to 5 offensive plays. I'm going to formation and do a bunch of crap off of that. And that's what we like. It's simpler than trying to learn a 300-page offensive playbook that has every possible run and every possible pass that a human can make. So that's kind of where I think it's simple and it's diverse at the same time.
Good answer. Coach Bennett?
It's a lot of the same. Strong, very simple run game, but it looks versatile. because of the formations. He does a fantastic job formation of people and getting what he wants. Aside from that, and he's an excellent quarterback coach. He's got excellent offensive coaches around him. That they all the air raid stuff works, and the run game is solid. And also with high school coaches are still people. We all get sucked into the hype, and right now, this the in vogue offense, man.
Mm-hmm.
Coach Steve put it in the chat, Air Raid 2.0, although I think that's copyrighted by somebody. But that's what it is. I mean, it's the new age Air Raid, because now all those coaches puff their chest out because they run counter track. And that's awesome. I think it's evolving, it's evolving the game. And those clips look real cool on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do.
And god dang, if you've got what Lincoln Riley's got, by all means, do it. Because it's tough stop. Some of the stuff he does when you watch him. If you're fortunate enough to have some of that film, some of the stuff he does is outrageous. He's I would put him second behind Coach Leach in what he does in the passing game, as far as the air raid stuff goes. Phenomenal stuff. I mean, he's next level, man. He's next level.
Yeah, and I know he has that background in air raid, and yes, a lot of his passing concepts are air raid. But he adds so much to the run game that most air raid guys aren't able to do. And so there's kind of a misconception that Oklahoma's soft on offense because they throw the ball and all that kind of stuff. But really, their run game is just as good as maybe a Clemson, and they've shown it. All right, so let's move on to any specific players or memories that you have from Oklahoma football. So when you think Oklahoma football, Coach Bennett, I'm going to let you have first shot at this one. When you think Oklahoma football, what specific players do you think of? And then do you have any moments that come to mind the most?
As a beaten down Minnesota Vikings fan, Adrian Peterson's my favorite Oklahoma player ever. More recently, I mean, from a coaching standpoint, I love the stuff he did with Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray was a game changer. Mm-hmm. A quarterback that could really scoot. I mean, really run, but he wasn't a run first guy. I mean, he could throw it. He'd throw it on the laser. Memories. I mean, being a Clemson fan, I won't say anything about the 2014 Russell Athletic Bowl where they got smoked by Clemson, or the 2015 Orange Bowl where they lost to Clemson. Every year I look forward to that Oklahoma State game because there's not, to me, when you talk about on the cutting edge of the spread offense, I don't know if there's one game when two teams play that are both right there on it as much as Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. What Coach Gundy and those guys do out in Stillwater is phenomenal. Plus, I mean, I don't know if y'all listen to Pardon My Take, Barstool, one of their podcasts, but that's an all-time color game. Great color schemes on both sides of Oklahoma State. And Oklahoma's just a great game to watch on TV. But it's a great game to go back and break down because it's kind of like the Army-Navy deal. They play each other every year, so they're going to break out some different stuff against each other because they know each other so well, and they've got every tape of each other playing other teams for the last, eons of years. But any of those Oklahoma State games are my favorite. I mean, I like the Texas game too, but it usually falls down south. It seems like that's always a weekend where there's big SEC and ACC games going on as well. But when they play Oklahoma State, it's in that huge slate of games, but it's always one that gets highlighted because there's going to be a lot of points. Mm-hmm. There might not be a lot of really good defense, but there'll be a bunch of big hits because them kids, it's like they generally don't like each other. And Those are some great football games. Those are my favorites. And like I say, players, Adrian Peterson, because it's Adrian Peterson, great football player.
Yeah, so for me, specific players, I really started to get into college football right when Colt McCoy was a sophomore at Texas. And he's one of my all-time favorite players because that was when I started to fall in love with college football. And so when I think Oklahoma, typically the first person I think of is Sam Bradford, because it was always Colt McCoy versus Sam Bradford. Now, I'm not saying he's my favorite. I'm just saying that's like the first name who usually pops into my head. And, obviously recently you got Kyler Murray, you got Baker Mayfield and all those. Oh gosh, yeah, in the chat, yeah, that was – so one of my moments, a positive moment for Oklahoma was the Baker Mayfield with the flag plant in Ohio State. But seriously, though, like, I'm not saying this because I'm a Texas fan, but Oklahoma, when it comes to big games, it doesn't matter if it was Bob Stoops or Lincoln Riley. I'm talking big games like playoff games, bowl games, national championship games. They seem to get smoked every time they're in one of those big games, and they just do not rise to the occasion. Obviously, they took Georgia to overtime a couple years ago, and that was a really good game. But for them, they got smoked by LSU last year. It was not pretty. They got physically dominated by Alabama the year before that. And so that's what really comes to mind. They do come to play when it's in Oklahoma State or Texas in the regular season. Last year, I don't know if you guys remember the game versus Baylor where they had that huge comeback because Baylor was up on top of them for a while. So that's a big moment. That's recent. I'm just saying there's not a whole lot of positive that I think about when I think Oklahoma football. That's just from a personal standpoint. Coach Steve, players and moments.
Players, I know we've said it and it's recent. I can't stand Baker Mayfield. He was good, but I cannot stand him. I like Kyler Murray. I still like him. I think, he's going to grow into a good quarterback. He seemed like a good leader watching him play. He left it all on the field. He tried as hard as he could. Moments, you can't it's against them. The Boise State Statue of Liberty play against them. I'll always remember that against them. And then one thing I was this quarantine watching them with Sam Bradford against Florida in the national championship game, I totally forgot they ran a no huddle fast paced under center offense. They were pro style under center, going as fast as they could back then. So remembering those type of things from way back when. But yeah, I remember that Boise State game like it was yesterday and loved it.
All right, and Coach Bandstra.
Kind of like Coach Bennett, my mind went to Adrian Peterson. That's just because I remember him playing in college and then the immediate success he had in the NFL. Recent times is, just a string of quarterbacks. And, I'd forgotten about Sam Bradford until you brought him up. I just feel bad for the man. The man doesn't have any knees left at this point. That last year he should not have played. I remember them saying when he was at Arizona, he said he was bone on bone on his knee. Just like cartilage was gone from all the surgeries. It's like, oh, that poor man. He still made $20 million. Good for him. Yeah, and then the moments, there's kind of like three things. One, kind of like Coach Steve said, the Boise State game sticks out because just it showed the underdog can win. Kind of the other part is I lived in, as I've said here, I lived in Texas 6-7 years. So those Red River rivalry games were, things to watch. Vince Young was there at that time. Those were games. They're just like bloodbaths, and they just fight. And kind of like Ohio State, Michigan up here. It's the same thing down there. It's one of those national rivalries that are just going to stand out from just the beginning. And then kind of just recent stuff, obviously, with me living in Ohio, the Baker Mayfield planting the flag kind of stands out, and that is what that is. He won. He gets to do what he wants. Move on.
All right, yeah. because I'm a Texas fan, you know, I have to watch Oklahoma, Texas every single year. Last year was kind of embarrassing as a Texas fan. That defense was just not very good at that point of the year. And then the year before that, though, I think it was a pretty close game with Kyler Murray during the Red River rivalry game, the first time they played each other. It was close, and Texas pulled it out. But then Oklahoma came back and whooped them in the Big 12 title game. So hopefully we'll see that. Talking about upcoming games. All right. Next question, Coach Bandstra, I'm going to give you first shot at this one. Talking about schedule. Hopefully you guys got the second part of the schedule down there on the script here. It says, looking at the schedule, what games are you most looking forward to and why? And so for the listeners, we'll talk. I'm going to list off the schedule real quick. First game versus Missouri State at home. Second game at home versus Kansas State. Third game away at Iowa State. Fourth game, Red River rivalry with Texas. The next game after that, at TCU. And then at Texas Tech. Then at home versus Kansas. At home versus Oklahoma State for the Bedlam game. Away at West Virginia. And then at home versus Baylor. So the question is, which games are you most looking forward to and why? Coach Bandstra, you're up first.
This is so bad. I'm just going to be blunt. Like, honestly, none. It's not. There's nothing in there. Like, if you force me to choose, I'd say Kansas, Iowa State, and Kansas State. Like, I mean, the Texas probably is what it is, but, I mean, until Texas can prove that they're back on top, I mean, it is what it is. Kansas, just because I want to see if Brent Dearman can still just carve up Big 12 defenses after a full year. I mean, Iowa State, I just really like Matt Campbell, and I think he's doing really good things there. I think it's going to be hard for him to win that game at Iowa State anyways. I think Oklahoma will dominate that game. And then Kansas State, just because if they're going to have a competitive game on the schedule, it's going to be Kansas State. Like, truly, and I know Bennett said that in the chat earlier, like, that's, like, I don't know what Baylor's going to look like with the new head coach and all that, and good for them. But Kansas State, that staff is good, like, really good. And they've continued to build on what Coach Snyder left them, and I'd argue it's better. Like, if anybody's going to whack them in the face and test them for a national – when they start going play Alabama and Clemson, physical teams, it's going to be that game. Like, that's the only game that's going to test them the way they should be. So those would be the three if you made me force me to choose. But, like, look at the schedule, I'm just like, I mean, they shouldn't lose a game. If they trip up, it's going to be Kansas State, but Kansas State's home. I mean, and odds are that's probably going to be like a noon or 1 o'clock game Central Time. It ain't going to be like a late game. I mean, and then I'll get into and I'm probably going to piss off Texas fans here in a minute. Like, my problem that I've always had with the Red River rivalry is that it's always in Dallas. Like, so it never goes on Oklahoma soil ever. Like, that's not – so it's an away game every year essentially for them. I mean, yes, Texas still has to drive 4.5 hours up to Dallas, but still you're in home turf. Like, so that's always bothered me as well.
Okay. Coach Steve?
So I kind of agree with the Kansas State thing. I think people – I don't know if they're overlooking them, but they're not talking about them, which is probably good. They're probably liking not to be on the radar, but they can make some noise in the Big 12. They're always right there. They're always making some noise. And then you always look at the Texas game. I mean, it's them playing Texas. Everybody watches it. Everybody looks at it. And then, like he said, I'm going to love watching the Kansas game. I don't know if Kansas was going to have the recruits quite yet to make any noise. But I would love to see Brent Dearman, call plays against Oklahoma. I think he's going to be able to put those kids in a situation to move the ball, maybe score some, because they didn't run Brent Dearman's offense till halfway through the season. They had to learn it halfway through the season. Now they have, this time to learn it. And And then I still think that the Oklahoma State game, that could be a trap game for them. Oklahoma State could be off the radar again, and Oklahoma could slip up at that point and everything else. But I think those are the games that you need to look at. But I'm going to root for Brent Dearman in Kansas to upset them.
Yeah. You guys have kind of talked me into the Kansas one. I wasn't going to watch it because it's Kansas, but, Brent Dearman, we're all fans of what he's been able to do. Obviously, I have to say Texas because I'm a Texas fan, and hopefully I know they've got a new offensive coordinator. Hopefully that meshes well and they're able to get offense going because that wasn't their number one problem, but it seems to have been a problem every time they play Oklahoma. But I have to Oklahoma State, obviously, especially because Oklahoma State has a potential Heisman candidate in running back Chuba Hubbard, because nobody else in the Big 12 is going to stop him running the ball. And he's a big bruiser, and Oklahoma is not very good at stopping big bruising running backs because of kind of like what we talked about earlier, small defense. But Kansas State, I think the second game of the year, Kansas State, guess who was the one loss in conference for Oklahoma last year? It was Kansas State, 48-41. That was the final. So nobody's talking about Kansas State, so they're going to be fired up to be the underdog. And then Oklahoma's probably coming in fired up because they're thinking revenge. This is going to be a revenge game from last year. We'll see what happens. Obviously, new quarterback at Oklahoma. We'll see what happens. I think Kansas State's going to be one of those teams that has a shot at tripping them up pretty early on in the season. Coach Bennett, what do you think?
I think they're going to get beat September 26th against Kansas State because it'll be a home game with no fans. October the 10th, you got the Texas game, which is always a big one, and then you got November 21st is Bedlam. Those will probably be the only three games that I watch with great intent. Other than that, it's going to be same old, same old. They'll play another Big 12 team, and they'll beat the piss out of them. Brent Dearman's doing a great job at Kansas, but right now it'd be like an old Chevy truck race. They're my dogs.
All right.
My girlfriend's home, but right now it would be like a drag race between an old Chevy truck and a brand new Camaro. The only way the Camaro loses is if it blows itself up.
Yeah, and you guys have kind of brought up an interesting point. In the media, they always play up the high-scoring offenses, the fast-paced offenses, and how so many people that's what they want to watch. But then when you get the Big 12 and that's all that people do, and it's kind of like, oh, great, you got to watch these two spread teams go at it again, scoring each other. It's like, meh, I'm going to go watch Alabama, LSU beat the crap out of each other. Is it really what people really want? Like, is that what they want? They want a bunch of points. They want basketball on grass. It doesn't necessarily seem so. I mean, maybe not from a coaching standpoint. Maybe from a fan standpoint, it's a little bit different. But I don't know. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next question. Again, we'll talk a little bit about some schedule, and kind of like what we did with with Auburn. I'm going to talk about what do you guys think Oklahoma's ceiling is? How many games can they win this year? And what is their floor? How many games could they possibly lose this year? So real quick, Coach Steve, I'm going to give you first go at this, and I'm going to reread the schedule. At home versus Missouri State. At home versus Kansas State. Away at Iowa State. At home versus Texas. Well, in Dallas versus Texas. At TCU. At Texas Tech. At home versus Kansas. At home versus Oklahoma State. At West Virginia. And then at home with Baylor. What do you think their ceiling is? How many games could they win? And what do you think their floor is?
Well, with a Big 12 schedule, they can go 10-0. They can win every single one of them and go undefeated. So I say 10-0 or 8-2. The ones they could lose is, like we've all said, Kansas State could be that one that comes in and beats them. Then after that, it could be Texas or Oklahoma State, I think, that, steals one from them. But I think a 10-0 or an 8-2 type season. I would love to sit here and say 7-3 if a Kansas or a Baylor or someone sneaks one in, but I just don't think that's going to happen yet. But 10-0 is probably what's going to happen, or 9-1 if Kansas State's the only one that beats them. So somewhere in there is very realistic, and that's what's probably going to happen. Just we'll see how the quarterback play is and everything this year with them.
Okay. And Coach Bennett?
I got their ceiling at they're similar to Coach Steve. I mean, I think they could go 10-0, but my ceiling for them's 10-1 because we have the playoff. They'll play Alabama or Clemson and lose. Their floor, I think they could. It's not outside the realm of possibility for them to go 7-3 because I think Kansas State can beat them. I think that Texas game, they have owned Texas, but what Texas has that Oklahoma doesn't is they've got a kid catching the snap that's seen some games, and he's played in that game. So that's a little bit of a different factor. You never like this kid, the guy that's going to be the quarterback. Yeah, I've heard good things about him too, but it's always a little different when the coach is blowing the whistle when the defensive end gets close to you. And then, I mean, you're always in a game like the game against Oklahoma State, dropping a snap, throwing one bad pass, and you could lose that game because you got to score every time you touch it. So I think 7-3 is probably their floor. Even if they win 2 out of those 3, they could still be 8-2 if something crazy happens. And Dearman's going to score points on them. That's going to be something else. They could come out and implode. Everybody thinks they imploded last year against Kansas State. They didn't. They got beat by a very sound, fundamental football team. We know that because we're coaches. But when you work for ESPN and you just look at it on the ticker and you say, my God, they got beat by Kansas State. Damn, Oklahoma's falling apart. No, Kansas State has some more of the competent coaches that schemed them up and game plan for them. And I don't know if the guys at ESPN realize or not, but that staff at Kansas State, they lost more games last year than they've lost in the last 10. Because when they were at North Coast, they just don't lose. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be a big challenge for them moving forward in the Big 12. That's going to be Kansas State might end up being, they might not be the perennial year in, year out like Oklahoma, but as far as bully on the block, like when you play them, you've played them. They're bringing a little bit different mentality to the Big 12.
All right. Coach Bandstra.
I mean, if it goes as planned, 10-1, they'll lose the playoff game. I mean, but the thing you have to look, I mean, and I will see this, even though I'm not impressed by that schedule whatsoever, is they are starting a new quarterback. He is, if I remember correctly, a redshirt freshman. So things can go happen. And the other thing is, you have Kansas State week 2. Yes, it's home, but it's still, I mean, that's early. I mean, if they lose, it's probably going to be 2 games. It'd probably be Kansas State early, and then they'll trip up somewhere else because that redshirt freshman will make a mistake and struggle somewhere. Probably some night away game. And if I were to put money on it, it'd probably be TCU because Gary Patterson is good, and he's overhauled some of that staff, and they'll be ready to go. Like I said off air, like I've talked to Jerry Kill, like they have a good staff there. So if you're going to trip up a redshirt freshman, it's going to be that game. I mean, that's what Gary Patterson does, is he messes with people. And I mean, he had a little bit of down year last year. Gary Patterson tends not to have down years 2 years in a row. It just doesn't happen. So if anybody's going to give him fits with the redshirt freshman quarterback, it'll probably be TCU about middle of that schedule.
All right. So I'm going to kind of do what I did last time with Auburn. I went through the schedule, and I've kind of predicted what I thought was going to happen. Obviously, I think my ceiling, like you guys are saying, they could go unbeaten in with this schedule. Depends on what happens if they get things clicking. I think their floor probably 7-3 with this particular schedule, not counting maybe make that 7-4 with a loss in, I don't know, their bowl game. If there are any bowl games this year, who knows what's exactly going to happen. So Missouri State, unless something weird happens, that's a win. Kansas State was hard for me to choose. I want Kansas State to win. because I like Kansas State. I like what they do. I don't like Oklahoma. So unfortunately, I think personally, I think that revenge factor for Oklahoma kind of overcomes any underdog status from Kansas State. I think they come out guns blazing and overwhelm Kansas State, even if it is a closer game. I think they win versus Kansas State. Iowa State was also kind of difficult because that's been one of the teams that they kind of almost trip up on every single year, and they have. They did when it was Baker Mayfield. That was Iowa State that beat them that year. I still think they beat Iowa State. They just got better players, unfortunately. This next game, Texas, this might be wishful thinking, but I'm kind of hoping that the potential super senior and Sam Ehlinger comes out and just balls out, and they start getting things clicking with that new offensive coordinator that they poached from Oklahoma State. We'll see what happens with that. I predict Oklahoma will lose to Texas. I think Texas beats Oklahoma this year.
You are
TCU, huh?
You are a Texas fan.
I am a Texas fan. TCU, I don't know. I wasn't impressed with TCU the last 2 years, to be honest. I'm going to say Oklahoma wins that game, and they might give them some fits. I don't know. Texas Tech, they're going to win that game. They always do. Kansas, I like Brent Dearman. I don't think they have the horses to do it, even with the offense that he runs. I know they're going to score some points, but Oklahoma's going to score some points too. So I think Oklahoma wins versus Kansas. Oklahoma State, I kind of mentioned it earlier. I think Chuba Hubbard at Oklahoma State's going to run all over Oklahoma's defense. Personally, they're not going to be able to stop him. So unless Chuba Hubbard gets injured before this game, y'all quit it in that chat. It's a good thing they can't see this. Unless Chuba Hubbard gets injured before this game, I think Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma in that game. I think they easily beat West Virginia. And unfortunately for Baylor, because of all the coaching turnover and stuff, I don't think they're going to be that great this year. I'm pretty sure Oklahoma's going to beat Baylor. So that would be an 8-2 record. And again, I don't know if they're going to play a Big 12 championship game this year. If they are, it's probably going to be either going to be Texas or Kansas State that they play if they make it to that game. So we'll see about that. All right, guys. Any final thoughts before we get off the air here? Coach Steve, you want to go first? Final thoughts?
Final thoughts on Oklahoma?
Yeah.
I was just asking, I think that quarterback was on that Netflix show, QB1 Under the Lights. It's just trying to come back to me. Their quarterback, he's on one of those seasons. If he can play like they think he can play, he'll be like a Kyler Murray type, I think. He's smaller. So if he can play well, they're going to make some noise with their offense. Hopefully their defense improves. But then once they get to that college football playoff or a bowl game, I don't know how they'll survive. But I think here in a couple years, if Lincoln Riley and them recruit the way that he's going to recruit and get kids, you might see them. I don't know if they'll be on an Alabama Clemson level, but they're going to compete more. They're not going to get blown out. It'll be a competitive playoff game when we get back to normal. But Oklahoma's always going to be there. Whether we like it or not, they're going to be somewhere. And I could see it happening this year too.
All right. Coach Bandstra?
Oklahoma's Oklahoma. It's like, Alabama, Oklahoma, Ohio State, historically are teams that don't struggle. If they do struggle, they don't struggle for long periods of time in their history. They just don't. You might get a year or two. Alabama had a little bit longer, rougher patch there for a little bit because of sanctions and stuff pre-Saban. But, historically, those programs don't struggle. Those, when you think college football historically from 1940 on, those are three of the major programs. At one time, Texas was in that conversation and so forth. But, they don't struggle. They hire well. I mean, Bob Stoops, I mean, give him credit. He stepped down at the exactly right time and had his successor in line and recognized what it was. Bennett, I'm going to get you back. I'm just saying. So, yeah, I mean, I've lost my train of thought because of Bennett. But, I mean, it's a great program. I mean, as long as he's there, they're going to be successful, as long as he keeps hiring well. I mean, I know there's always the rumors with the Dallas Cowboys and all the other ones. I mean, he can be as selective as he wants if he ever wants to leave there. There's no reason for him to leave. I mean, he has essentially the key to the city. I mean, if he keeps winning and keeps beating Texas, he ain't going anywhere.
Yeah. All right. And Coach Bennett.
I think every year, every NFL opening, but especially that one down in Dallas they're gonna try to poach him. I said it at the beginning, Coach Bandstra just said it. He would be a fool to leave Norman, Oklahoma, especially to go to Jerry's World. Especially to go to Jerry's World and coach in a situation that's proven time and time again. I mean, he ran off Jimmy Johnson, his college roommate, and then he brought in, now he could try the whole, hey, we hire Oklahoma coaches, we win the Super Bowl. Barry Switzer won with Jimmy Johnson's team, but he should stay in Oklahoma until he's ready to retire and be the governor of Oklahoma, because that's how that works out. That's how his life trajectory should play out. Coach, win 400 games, retire, be the governor, because he's got it made. I don't think Oklahoma's going anywhere. I think, like I said earlier, if Texas gets right, makes things a little bit tougher. Kansas State's going to be nipping at you, but Kansas State just not recruiting-wise isn't going to be at their level. There's going to be some years they're just going to beat Kansas State by lining up 11 men on the field. But that gap closes after those kids turn into sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And then it repeats, rinse and repeat. But Oklahoma's a great program, one of the all-time great programs. They're not. They're like the Yankees. They're not going anywhere. Like them or love them or hate them, not going anywhere. Like Ohio State, they're not going anywhere, no matter how much we wish that maybe they would.
All right, this is just going to talk to the listeners here. The people who are watching this on YouTube can't see this either. But man, I wish you guys could really read this chat as it was going on. I think we could sell tickets to this chat, and it might actually sell pretty well. All right, guys. So that's going to be it for today's episode of the Armchair Coaching Podcast program profile on the Oklahoma Sooners. Be on the lookout for new episodes coming out. The plan is we're going to start putting out at least 2 episodes a week. So look for new episodes early in the morning on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So look for those coming out. The next couple programs that we would like to profile are going to be the Ohio State Buckeyes and Alabama Roll Tide. All right. So be on the lookout for those. See you guys next time.